We want to thank our primary sponsor and my employer by day, Nassau Financial Group. Our tagline is, working harder to be your carrier of choice. We support you with best-in-class service. We seek to keep things simple, and we'll have your back in the years to come. We're headquartered in Hartford, Connecticut, with $27 billion in assets and over 500,000 policyholders. We've been doing this a long time, 170 years, but we remain humble enough to always try to improve.
Welcome to That Annuity Show, the podcast that will make you an expert in explaining annuities to your clients. Give us 30 minutes each week and we'll shave hours from your client presentations. Now, here's your host, Paul Tyler.
Hi, this is Paul Tyler, and welcome to another episode of That Annuity Show. Ramsey, good morning.
Good morning to you. Always great to be here.
Yeah, we've had quite a run of different podcasts, in person, part remote. Now, remote, it's we've had a real interesting series of people, very interesting people on our program, and today will be no exception. What do you think, Ramsey?
I agree. I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. There's more to life than financial products, and I think this is going to be an interesting discussion.
Yeah, it's the why. Yes, we sell annuities, but why? And that will really be the topic. And join us today is Gary Sirak, owner of Sirak Financial Services. But not on our show today, Gary, to talk about your practice, but we'll absolutely get into it. But the book you just released. So Gary, first of all, welcome to our show.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and so tell our listeners about. I guess first off, tell us about the book you wrote, but also tell us why'd you do this?
Yeah, so the book I wrote is called How to Retire and Not Die: The 3 Ps That Will Keep You Young, and the 3 Ps are purpose, passion, and a plan. And really, the reason I wrote the book, I've been in the financial services business for 40 years. My dad started in 1957. We're third generation out of Canton, Ohio. And what I learned in the last 20 years of really working in the retirement space is that most people were retiring from something but not to something. And that's a huge problem. And I really just got tired of visiting them in nursing homes and going to funerals, and it was just depressing. And I said, there's something really missing because everybody focuses on money. But there's so much more to retirement than money. It's what you do with 26 years of your life. And I use that 26 years because of a marathon that I would never run but might drive sometime. But that's a whole other story.
Okay, we're definitely going to head that way because I run too, so I want to talk more about this. But I don't know, maybe we start with purpose. So how do you help people find a purpose?
Well, it's really fascinating. When they come in, of course, everybody talks money, and I know that, and I expect that, and it's the first thing, the only thing on their mind. But after we get through the money part, which you do, and it's math, so you figure out, should they retire, how much, all that stuff that we do. But then it gets interesting, and then I ask them a question, what's next? And then I get very quiet and wait for them to answer. And they look at me and they say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, tell me what you're going to do the first day you retire, the first week, the first month, the first year. I'd like to know what your plan is. And then they're like a deer in headlights. They have no plan. And that's really how we get to purpose. And I say, well, tell me what you want to do. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, what's your purpose after retirement? He said, well, what does that mean? I said, well, it means, what are you going to do for other people? Because that's what purpose is in my mind. It's what I do for other people. Passion's what I do for myself, and the plan is you got to have a plan. If you don't, you can have all the purpose and passion in the world, but you got to do something with it. You got to take action.
So I've got a question. When you ask that question, especially if somebody comes in and they're expecting a traditional, more business type meeting, notwithstanding like you're asking the right question and your heart is in the right place. I'm also wondering, how do people react to that? I assume some people react very well and say, "Wow, I'm really glad that question was asked." There are others that might react a little bit differently and wonder why you're asking. And so how often does that happen, and how do you sort of disarm those situations when they occur?
No, that's really, no one's asked me that question before, so thanks, Ramsey. That question is unique, and what happens is, I would say 90-10, 90 just say, wow, I never really thought about it, and maybe I've thought about it a little, but I never took it that seriously. 10% look at me and say, yeah, so what are you for? You're a financial advisor. What do you know about that? And I've had some people come back at me on that, and I said, well, actually, I know quite a bit about it. It's one of those things I've actually paid attention to and studied. I've gotten some reactions that weren't very positive to that question, and they say, really, we'll take care of that. You just take care of the money. And I say, okay. And you know what happens? Mostly those people don't become clients. They just aren't a good fit for me. And I'm okay with that. It's a big world. They can find someone else to work with. I'm much more interested in having clients that I get on really well with and that understand where I'm coming from, and I get a better sense of where they're coming from, too.
Well, if 90% of the people are responding very positively to that, I think that says it all.
Yeah, I will tell you a funny story, and I do mention in the book. It kind of was incredible. There was a really good friend of mine. He and his wife, we used to play golf with him and do stuff with him, and social friends. And he owned a very successful business. He calls me one day and says, hey, my wife and I are going to come and see you. And I said, great. So we sit down in a conference room, and he said, Gary, I'm so excited. I have my business sold. And I look at his wife, and she is not excited at all. And she made that very clear by her expression. And we talked about it, and plenty of money. I mean, it's kind of amazing. But the problem is he had no idea what he was going to do with the rest of his life. So I asked him. And he looked at me and said, well, I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about that. I said, nah. I said, really, what are you going to do? And he said, I don't know. And his wife did something, and she said, I'm really upset about this. And she smacked him in the arm. And she hit him pretty hard. And this is this really small, diminutive lady who I've never seen do anything like even close to that. And she said, I've been telling you this. You need to take it serious. And if you don't, this isn't going to go well. So the story is he sells his business. The first day he gets up in the morning, he heads to McDonald's for breakfast, which he always did. He comes back to his house, and she has deadbolted him out of the house. Literally locked him out. Yeah. He cannot get in his own home. So he doesn't have a key because he just pushes the garage door button. The garage is open. He doesn't have a key to his house because he never needed one. And he's sitting there in his garage, and he can't get in his own home. Finally, she answers the door, and she slides a pen and a tablet out to him and says, go figure it out. And she slams the door and said, I'll see you at dinner. And that was it. And she literally kicked him out of his own home.
That is
great story.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Phenomenal. It's just interesting.
Well, Gary, there's a lot to unpack in that story. And I can relate a real-world sample. So, Ramsey and I were down at the Stones. We shared our mutual admiration and experience with the Stones before the show. But we actually did the man-on-the-street interviews. And there was one couple where, and I was asking, so what do you plan to do when you retire? Husband said, I can't remember what he said. He came up with some answer. Oh, I'm going to do the following. And his wife says, we're going to travel. And it almost hit him. He says, oh, yeah, we're going to travel. So how much, sticking with with your couple, sometimes when you retire, you're thinking it's about me and it's my numbers and my purpose is my purpose. But it feels like the purpose has got to involve a spouse. Maybe it involves kids. As you've helped people navigate finding purpose, how many voices or people have had to be at the table to help somebody navigate this transition?
Well, Paul, interesting scenario. We went to dinner. I like to go to dinner. Anyway, so I'm skinny, but I eat all my meals. Anyway, so we go to dinner with some friends, and we're having dinner, and they bring up the book. I try not to do that. I just don't want to go there. But if someone asks me, okay, I'm good. So they bring out the book, and then they bring out lists, and they've literally done. I have in the book this one section, likes, loves, and hates. And they were trying to get together to figure out what they liked, what they loved, and what they hated, and figuring out how they're going to do retirement. So once they saw my book, there's another section called wish list. And the wish list is very interesting. It says, what did you wish you were doing but you couldn't because you were working? And they both did their own wish list, and then they got together and said, wow, your wish list is so different than mine. So they were kind of adding things, deleting. It was fascinating. And my wife just sat there, and she was floored because no one had ever really approached us like that. And the whole dinner ended up being about how they were planning their retirement based on my book. It was actually, and I had to buy dinner too. So, yeah. Anyway. Kind of cool, though, how that comes together. And so the reality of it is I think people have to get on the same page. And in this case, the couples did. And I really think, seriously, it's got to be a couple decision. The ones where there haven't been a couple decision haven't worked so well. It causes issues. So I think they really need to have some sort of meeting of the minds.
So tell us a little bit about what made you, what motivated you to write this. I mean, you've got a thriving practice. You've written a couple books before, and I guess this is a project you undertook with your son as well. And tell us a little bit about what made you decide to do this, and what a very interesting and rewarding thing to be able to listen to somebody over dinner talk about how your book was so impactful. So it's
absolutely
it's worked out really well. But tell us about how you got there.
Well, I guess I'm a closet writer. I was an English major. I went to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, and I was an English major, and I really liked reading. I liked writing, and I knew I wasn't going to be doing anything in the real world. I wasn't how I was going to earn my living. And I really never thought about writing books, but I attend Strategic Coach in Chicago, Dan Sullivan, and I've been going to Sullivan for 15 years. And many, many years ago, Sullivan suggested that you write a book. And I listened, and I said, yeah, that's something I always wanted to do. I didn't do it. And I kept going back, and he kept talking about the value of writing a book. And so that's how If Your Money Talked, What Secrets Would It Tell became my first book. And that really was the launching pad for me writing. And then I started doing all these radio shows and podcasts and interviews, and it was fun. I had a good time, and I liked impacting people. So that really got me started on it. The second book happened because I was sitting in a coffee shop called Karma Cafe, and I was listening to, at 8 o'clock in the morning, I like mochas, and that's a theme in the book too, mochas and hot fudge milkshakes. I don't know. Anyway, if you're going to be addicted, those are good things, especially. But my sense on that was I was sitting at 8 o'clock in the morning drinking my mocha, kind of minding my own business, and 4 college students sat down right behind me. And I couldn't help but overhear their conversation. They were talking about the American dream, and they referred to it as the American disaster. At least 3 of them did. And they called it the American disaster. And they had college loans and credit card debt and and the job market's horrible and all these things. And I listened to that, and then the 4th guy started talking and said, listen, I don't agree with you guys. I'm going to graduate from college. I'll pay off my loans. I'm going to have a great life. I don't know why you guys are so negative. And they shut him down in about a second. So I walked out of the Karma Cafe with really bad karma that day. And I thought, wow, that just was a terrible conversation. Anyway, 3 nights later, I wake up in the middle of the night, and I said, I'm going to write a book about the American dream and make it not the dream those guys were talking about, but the real one. So that's what motivated the second book. And the third book really happened because some very good friends of mine retired to nothing. And I just couldn't get them focused on they had to figure this out. And they just didn't. And one checked out in about 6 months, and that was really sad. And one actually never made it. They found out, this is incredibly sad, she was retiring. The day of her retirement, she got a call from the Cleveland Clinic telling her that she had pancreatic cancer. Unbelievable. And so she lasted less than 6 months. So 2 people that I really liked and enjoyed their company were gone. And I think in her case, she had no clue what she was going to do with the rest of her life. And she was a very successful woman, ran a huge company. I mean, she was a rock star. But she had no other plans. And even though we talked about it, I'm going to travel, I'm going to do this. all kinds of stuff. Never did she do any of it, and she never got a chance.
Oh, it's a shame. Unfortunately, I think we all know stories like that. I've worked with people at one company about 10 years ago, and yeah, I know a handful of people who, Gary, retired, found out, year after they had cancer, 2 years out, had heart attack. Sad stories where you work this hard and you don't get to enjoy your lifetime. To your point, I bet they could have retired sooner. Now, maybe they wouldn't have known they had those problems, right? But they probably could have all taken an extra 5 years off had they actually, had the plan in place. Maybe we could talk about a fourth P, okay? Process. This will be your next one. So you and tell me if I got the order mixed up. Purpose, passion, plan, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you start with the plan, which is why somebody shows up. They want a plan.
Yes.
You go back to the process, the purpose. How many times when somebody actually figures out their purpose do you go back and change the plan?
Oh, almost all the time. Yeah, it's almost guaranteed. I have people that quit, and 6 months later they're working in another job because they realized they should never have quit. They lost the social aspects. So that's what people miss too. Work gets a bad rap. I mean, some work's terrible. I get that, but a lot of work isn't so terrible. It's a social system. It's a financial system. It's a place to go. It gives you time so you know when you're supposed to be there, when you're not supposed to be there. I mean, it really gives you structure in your life. And when people don't have that, who are very used to it, some just look at me and say, whoa, I really thought retirement was going to be great. I don't like this. I'm going to get a part-time job, which, by the way, I love. And I also like when they retire slowly. I'm a big fan of, semi-retirement. I tell people I've been semi-retired for 2 years now. Now, I come in at 9:30. I walk out of here about 3:30. Yeah, I work half a day in my mind. And I used to work a lot of hours. Now I work not so many hours. To me, I feel like I'm semi-retired most days. Some days I feel like I work 24 hours. But, the majority are pretty good.
So that's a very interesting concept that it's really it can be it doesn't need to be a binary event that you go from totally working to not working, and that in and of itself is super probably jarring for a lot of people. So when you as you talk to some of these clients and friends, how often do you find yourself counseling them on that specifically?
Well, a lot. In fact, probably one of my best friends in the whole world was just here this morning because we was dropping something off, and we were talking, and I forced him to go part-time. I mean, I'm a one-man board of directors for his company, and he and I grew up together. We were like 3 feet tall when we met each other, and we've been great friends ever since. And when he told me he was going to retire, I said, that's great. Let's figure out a plan. And he said, well, what do I do? And I said, well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to figure this out. And part of it was for him is that he needed to wean himself because he was there 6 days a week. He was there at 6 in the morning. He just was addicted to his work. And so we broke the addiction very slowly. Now he goes in at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, and he's out of there by 11:30. And I thought, wow, he's gone from huge hours to 4 hours a day, and some days he doesn't go at all. And I looked at him this morning, and I said, you're really getting used to this uncomfortably. He said, you have no idea. He said, Gary, I go in. I said, what are you doing now? He said, well, I'm actually going to go to Target and buy some toilet paper. I said, great. This is a guy running this huge company, and he's running errands for his own company. I mean, I love that. Just because, he didn't just quit and sit home and try and figure out what to do with the rest of his life. He's still doing stuff. In fact, we were talking about that for a couple minutes before the show. And he gave me some new ideas that he had, and I thought, well, that's pretty good. And he's thinking the right way, and the right way is when you retire to something, it's just a whole different mindset. And I deal with mindset. Retirement mindset's a big thing. There's some people that shouldn't retire. They got nothing to retire to. I know so many people that are so much identified by what they do, I just don't think they'll ever retire because they have nothing to turn to.
Yeah,
which is, by the way, very sad.
Well, it is. So let's maybe give some advice to Ramsey Smith Inc. Okay, who should be on his personal board of directors as he's sort of thinking like, what do I do over the next 20 years? I mean, spouse, yes, Spouse gets automatic seat at the table. Who else?
The chair,
Well-
really.
The chair. Yeah.
Good point. Anyway, I was going to say, I have this thing that I discovered for myself a long time ago. I call them retirement mentors. And what I did is I looked for people that I thought were very successful retired people. Not financially successful, but retirement successful. People that seemed to be really engaged, happy, in a good place. And then I would interview them, much like you guys did the man on the street. I was doing the retirement in the cafe. So I would sit down with people and say, hey, I know you're retired. Tell me what you do, how you do it. And we would get into these wonderful conversations, and I would take notes, and those people were kind of cool how they did that stuff. And then I kept those notes, obviously, and I look for those retirement mentors today, and I still look for them because they figured it out, and other people don't have it figured out. So I suggest, Ramsey, look for someone who's successfully retired and seems very happy in their life, and tap into them and say, hey, what do you do? How are you doing it? You know, what's working for you?
So it's interesting. That's not necessarily a financial discussion, right? That's probably part of it, right? There's probably some degree of stability. But once you get past stability, there are probably diminishing returns on the financial part relative to the other pieces of it, right? And so you had all these conversations. Are there any particular conversations you had that were either surprising or where people did something you thought was particularly exceptional?
Yeah, two. And funny, it was both in the same place I used to go breakfast. It's long gone, but I used to go to breakfast there probably 3 times a week. And I would keep seeing the same people, so pretty soon you get to know them, and I'd sit at the counter. And one gentleman in particular was a national sales manager for a food processing company. And he was probably my best mentor from the standpoint of sales, but what I really liked about him is how he worked. And he was in a position, name was Sam. Sam would work a schedule. The owner of the company just said, Sam, whatever you want to do it, because you're the best sales manager I've ever had in my life. You figure out how you want to retire. So Sam built his own retirement inside that company. And I thought that was brilliant. And I have told so many people that. I said, listen, before you quit, if you're not the owner, go to the owner and say, listen, I would like to still hang around here and do some things. Are you okay with that? And sometimes they are, and sometimes they no, we just want to cut bait. But what I also told them, and I just had this conversation a couple weeks ago with somebody, I said, make sure they understand that you're not expected to be paid the same amount of money because you're not going to put in the same effort. But once they get that, there's a really good chance they're going to keep you because what you have in your brain, they don't get any other way. So I love that conversation. Sam was a wonderful influence on me about working part-time. The other gentleman was amazing. He quit at 50, and he had a portfolio. He had a business. He sold his business. Actually, he was in the oxygen business, so he was selling oxygen to hospitals and things like that. And I always loved that. The guy was in the oxygen. Anyway, so he was a wonderful man to talk to, and I got a lot of opportunities to just sit down and pick his brain. So we were discussing one day how you retire at 50, and he said, well, the first thing I did is I went and got myself an office downtown Canton. And he said, and I go down there every morning, I do my mail, I pay my bills, I check my brokerage account because I want to know what I'm doing. And then he said, and then I have projects I work on. I said, what kind of projects? He said, well, once people found out I was retired, they would bring me things and ask me to look them over. And he said, in my own way, I'm now a consultant, and I never really intended to do that, but I'm involved in all these other businesses. And he said, I probably sit on 5 different boards of directors, all by accident. And he said, I have the best retirement ever. They pay me to come to their meetings. I give them whatever advice I have, and then I get to go do what I want to do.
I think that's a great story. People need these positive stories, right? To feel like they're not just leaving a company and leaving a career. Feels like death to a lot of people, right? Early death if you don't have a plan like this. Last P, middle P, passion. Tell us how does that come up? Do you plan for passion? Do you find passion? Do you discover it as you're going through the process?
I think you discover it. I think that's where it really comes. And again, I kind of put them through some homework. We give them guardrails and we give them plans. And my son was great at structuring things and how you figure this out. And he's wonderful at those kind of details. I'm good at talking. He's good at putting what I say down on paper. It's a good combination. So he created some guidelines to help people really figure out what their passion is. And we have this thing where you go somewhere and you turn off your phone and you can have I like old fashions or mochas or whatever I'm drinking, and hopefully not old fashions during the day. But anyway, you go to a quiet place and you just kind of think about, what do you really like in life? What makes you happy? And it's so interesting when I ask people what makes them happy, people don't have an answer. I know what makes me happy. I know a good meal, a good conversation, connecting people to other people. I love that stuff. I like seeing things I've never seen before, experiences. Music is a huge passion of mine. I sit on the board of at least I did, of a public radio station. Now I'm just an adjunct member, but it's been great. I did that for almost 12 years, and it allowed me to be in this alternative record kind of world and meet all these musicians, and it was just fun to meet these people. So that's always been a passion. So those are the things that I think you have to work through. What you guys went to see the Rolling Stones. That's obviously a passion. You don't do that by accident, guys. I mean, that's something you said, whoa, we're going to do, because that couldn't have been cheap, so that had to be something you really wanted to do. That's the stuff that I look at, Paul.
Well, we need to give credit and thanks to the Alliance for Lifetime Income for making that that trip possible. So.
I don't know who they are, but I'd like to meet them.
Oh yeah. No, great group. Listen to the episode that's coming out this week.
Okay.
It's you'll love it. So let's just turn gears a little bit. Hey, got my purpose, passion. How does the plan? How do you approach the plan? Now, I could say I love the word you used. What do you say? Retire slowly, right? Because it's hard to go from it's very hard to go from getting a paycheck to just living off assets. I think annuities, obviously we're that annuity show. We're a little biased towards annuities. I've seen people pretty effectively give themselves a smaller or stepped-in paycheck with some of the guaranteed, income riders. How do you approach it, Gary? So I want to sort of walk my way into it. Is it life insurance? Is annuities? How are you advising clients to do it? Are you doing drawdowns off of their assets, or a combination of both?
Yeah, combination of both. I really am. And my big goal is making sure that their money lasts as long as they do, and preferably longer, because I have a charitable side. If I can figure out how to make it longer and they're not wired into something, we can get them to do something charitable. And that's a fun conversation. I just had a really cool story happen in Canton, and it really set me back a bit, because it's someone I've known for well over 40 years. When I got out of college with an English degree, I was pretty much unemployable. So a man hired me to sell waxes and polishes, and he paid me $100 a week, and he happened to be a very good friend of my father's, and I call it a mercy hire. He was trying to get me out of my dad's house, and the only way they could figure out how to get me out of there was to give me some money, so I said sure. So me, who knew absolutely nothing about cars, a lot about rock and roll, this was back in the early 70s, went on the road selling waxes and polishes. Well, one of the people I sold to happened to own a body shop. So fast forward, these people have been friends of mine for a long time, clients. It turns out her brother had passed away, and he was flying in the Vietnam War jet, and he was a fighter pilot, and he went down in the Bay of Tonkin, and they never found him. So 40, 50 years later, a jet shows up. We have this museum in Canton called MAPS, and this jet shows up, and they started doing research on the jet and determined, because of his logbook, that he had flown that jet. And so all of a sudden, something that had never had closure now had closure. And the part that I was kind of getting to is they always had a few things that they were kind of interested in. All of a sudden, their passion became, what can we do for this museum where my brother's jet that he flew in? And so now we're doing the charitable side. So what I really try and do is figure out how we can manage money. Again, if you have a large family, it's going to go to family. I get that. But usually there's a charitable liking there, and in this case, it's really kind of interesting how it came to be. And so she's down in Florida right now, but we just had a pretty long conversation about what to do and how to help that museum long term. So that gets to be part of the planning part. And I love that stuff. That's the stuff where the wheels really get to turn.
But it also pulls back in the purpose and the passion.
Yes.
As well. A story like that one. It's pretty amazing.
So, I mean, yeah, it was, it really, if you think about how this happened, I mean, I talked to her the day that they did the service for him, and they did 21 gun salute, and I mean, all the stuff that never happened now happened, and it's just, pretty incredible, really.
Well, talk about being filled with passion, purpose, and a plan, Gary. I think you certainly check all the boxes. So tell us a little bit about your passion. So, music, you're on the board of a local radio station, is that right?
Yes.
Or you were.
Yeah.
You're clearly a big Cleveland Indians fan. I'm looking in the background here.
Yeah. Now the Guardians, but I'll have to figure that out. I don't know.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
I have a really cool poster from the 1948 World Series, and it definitely doesn't say Guardians. Anyway, but that's the way it is. So, yeah.
Yeah. And in running, tell us about running.
Well, here's the deal with running. I was a basketball player my whole life. And I grew up on the courts, and that's what I like to do. So I never really ran track or did anything like that. But when I did the book, I was putting this together. I realized that to me, work is like climbing a mountain. And you climb this mountain, and I actually climbed in the Tetons when I was younger. And I went out with some friends, and we decided to hike. And none of us had ever done it. A couple of them were Boy Scouts, thank God, because they knew what they were doing. And then the other two of us were totally clueless. You know, we were climbing the mountains in the Tetons, and we would work our way up. And it was exhausting. It was heavy. It was not easy. But you'd get to the top of the mountain, and it would be so rewarding. And you'd get up there, and then you realize, okay, now I got to come back down, which, by the way, is much easier, at least on paper, but in reality it wasn't so easy because you're coming down steep inclines, and it was kind of tough. And again, we weren't doing, where you're climbing up rock cliffs and stuff like that, but we were doing some pretty serious climbs. And that was one part of the book. And I talked so work to me is kind of climbing that mountain. You get to the top, you plant your flag, you sit down in your lounge chair, and you pull up a cold one and say, oh man, I got this knocked. And then all of a sudden you realize, wait, I got 26 years or a marathon to live or run. So one of my friends, when I was working on this book, and this is how the marathon came in. We were having lunch one day, and he said, yeah, I'm going to run a marathon next week. And I said, where? He said, well, I'm going to run it, and I can't remember where he went, some city. And anyhow, he's running a marathon, and he said, have you ever run a marathon? I said, man, I don't even like driving 26 miles. There's no way I'm running a marathon. And for basketball, we had to run, and I hated that part of it. I loved the game. I hated the running part, but our coach said, you have got to be a runner. So I ran. Never liked it, but I always understood why people did. Anyway, so the marathon part became the second piece of the puzzle. Okay, you climb the mountain, now you run the marathon, and you do. And I came up with 26 years because my friend ran 26 miles. I said, okay, 26 miles, 26 years, I'm good. And then I looked at my average age of my population, my older population, and I realized a bunch of them were in their 90s. And I said, okay, they're actually getting there. So my 26 years, even though the charts say I'm way over, not so much in my practice.
Well, that sounds about right, because the numbers are skewed relative to socioeconomic status and a lot of other things. So yeah, it makes all the sense in the world that probably 26 into the 90s is a pretty reasonable expectation for most of the folks that that would work with you.
Yeah.
And it's worked that way. And the funny thing is, I read a stat. In fact, my nephew Jeff, who's in business with me, he's the third generation. He read me an article the other day. We were talking. He said, hey, Gary, this is very cool. People who have annuities live longer than people who don't. And I said, well, that's a strong selling point. We'll use that in the future. And then, so it's just one of those things. So the 26-mile thing popped in that way.
Yeah. No, this is great. Yeah, we've seen those same stats. If you're getting a consistent guaranteed paycheck, whether it's a pension, you're happier. You're happier, and you tend to live longer. So it's so a lot of benefits. A lot of benefits to having a plan and having thought this out. I don't know, Ramsey. What other thoughts or questions Yeah, for
Can we
Gary.
go back to music for a second?
Yes,
Because I want to
absolutely.
tell you something
Absolutely.
very cool.
Sure.
So the radio station, it's called 91.3 The Summit. It actually shows up in the book. But they do a program called Life and Lyrics, and that's where you get to take over the radio station for an hour, and you play what you want to play.
Oh, wow.
They interview you. It's very cool. It's a run out of Akron. And so my son Max, who lives in Keystone, Colorado, up in the mountains, he was in town for Thanksgiving, and I booked us to do a Life and Lyrics. So he and I sat down, and we worked out 5 songs, and the fellow who manages the radio station, Tommy Bruno, did an interview of Max and myself just last week. And it was so much fun. And we picked out 5 tunes, and they all had purpose in our life, and they all showed up in our life, and it was fun just to put all that together for the two of us and then have somebody record it. So that'll last a lot longer than I will. It was really a blast.
All right, we have to know. Do you remember the songs?
Oh, yeah. Well, the bands were interesting. You have to have the Beatles. We did Hey Bulldog. We started with, we did Talking Heads because I'm a huge Talking Heads fan, and my son was a Fish fan. And we were there's a story. When he turned 16, we went to London. And when we were in London, my wife and my son and I decided that we each could do one thing, one event. So my event was to go see Damn Yankees with Jerry Lewis. My wife's event was to go to see this old museum that's based on gardening equipment and gardening tools because she's a master gardener. And my son didn't have a clue what he wanted to do, and we're walking down the street, and there's a poster on a telephone pole that said Fish was playing at the Royal Albert. And Max said, I want to do that. And I said, Max, the deal's the deal. Whatever you want to do, we're doing. So we bought tickets for the Royal Albert Fish concert that night. And Fish closed the show with a cover of the Talking Heads. That's why Max picked that. And then he knew I loved the Talking Heads. So that was good. And then we did Beatles. We also did Steely Dan, Asia. And I've always been a huge Steely Dan fan. And I've seen him a few times, probably 4 times. And that was just one of those things that I just really like that music. We also played, we did Beatles, Talking Heads, Bowie. A huge David Bowie fan. And that was one of those songs where we talked about, we did Let's Dance and Modern Dance, whatever that is. But
yeah.
That's the tune we did. And the reason for that is because when Max was a kid, we played Bowie so much that we have videotape of him dancing at like 2 years old to Bowie. And, you can't not have that.
Right.
Yeah. So I think that's great. Gary, did you have a link? We'll put the link to your radio show in the notes, show notes, if you've got it.
It hasn't aired yet, but as soon as it airs, I'll get you guys. I'll let you know about it. I'll definitely keep you posted. It airs sometime in the middle of December. They haven't done anything with it yet. He's editing, and so we'll have something hopefully very soon. But it was just a blast. To be able to take over the radio.
As I think about it, though, and I think about the way you interact with your clients, and you ask them questions about the 3 Ps, and you ask them what they want to do. What an interesting window into somebody's thought process if you ask them what are the 5 songs that would be the playlist of your life. Right? I just never thought of that. And everybody's passionate about. Pardon me. Everybody's passionate about some music, right? Some music that they like a lot. So that's my takeaway, Paul. Before you ask, that's my number one of many takeaways. That's my number one takeaway. I love that idea.
Well, we have a lot of things in common, Gary. So Talking Heads, love Talking Heads. Man, they were like 20 years ahead of themselves, right? And they have one lyric that just kind of pops in my head. That's, boy, is it irrelevant. You may find yourself, I think, living in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife. You ask yourself, Ramsey, how did I get here?
Yeah.
How did I get here? And, I think, unfortunately, life is, people are not as intentional, and I'll certainly put myself in that category. We're not as intentional, Gary, as we should be. And I think what you're doing is giving your clients a chance to sort of take control over the last 26 years of their life, right? Intention, purpose, passion. So I think it's great. So, we'll put a link to your book in our show notes. And Gary, anything else? Where can people find your book? I think Amazon. Do you have a website?
Yeah, GarySirak.com.
Okay.
And the Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all those places have it. And yeah, it's funny. Talking Heads, Burning Down the House. How do you not like that song? Oh my God! I saw American Utopia twice because I went to see that song twice live. We flew to New York to do it. We did what you did. You went to see the Stones. I went to see American Utopia again. Saw him in Cleveland. Said nope, got to go again. So
okay, all right, well, good. All right, so we'll check the show notes. Gary, hey, thanks so much for your time. I think this was just a great discussion. Ramsey, thanks again for all your time here. And for those listeners, send us notes, send us comments, send us questions, send us recommendations of guests to be on our show. And definitely tune again next week for another episode of That Annuity Show.
Thanks for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend us on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information at thatannuityshow.com.